There's a specific kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it hollows out your soul, leaving an echo of what used to be. This isn't a story of grand gestures or explosive arguments. It's a testament to the terrifying power of unspoken truth between two people who once shared everything. Kira Kestrel, her blonde hair perfectly styled even in the early light, hummed a tuneless melody in the kitchen. Her sharp blue eyes, usually so animated, were fixed on the coffee maker, oblivious, or perhaps uncaring, that she had detonated our world with a single, clinical phrase the night before. "It's not my job to make you happy." She'd uttered it without blinking, while meticulously folding a crisp linen towel. Not just any towel, a precisely ironed, oatmeal-colored linen towel. The sheer absurdity of such a world-ending declaration emerging from such a mundane act had left me paralyzed. The worst things I've learned often happen quietly, delivered with the calm precision of a mathematical equation. Now she reached for her favorite mug, a delicate porcelain cup with chipped gold script declaring, "Empress of everything." Ivar Ingvar, mid-40s, lines of exhaustion etched around his tired eyes, stood motionless, a silent observer. I watched her pour the steaming brew, stir it with a tiny silver spoon reserved solely for her use, and something inside me simply disconnected. There was no anger, no tears, no desperate pleas, just a profound, almost dizzying hollowness, as if a trap door had opened within my chest and all the oxygen had been sucked out. She took a slow sip, a soft escaping her lips, then seamlessly transitioned to scrolling through her phone. It was as if I were nothing more than a kitchen appliance, a refrigerator, a sink, a fixed piece of furniture, background noise, utterly disposable. What if the most dangerous moment in a relationship isn't a fight, but the quiet realization you've become invisible? That's when I understood I had been reduced to a household utility in my own marriage, useful, predictable, quiet, and easily replaced. So I did something entirely uncharacteristic. I picked up my keys, walked out the front door, and didn't utter a single word. No note, no explanation, no dramatic farewell. I found myself 10 miles outside the city at a forgotten roadside inn. The wallpaper, a faded rose pattern, peeled slightly at the seams, and a restless ice machine hummed a monotonous tune down the hall. I switched off my phone, laid it face down, and perched on the edge of the queen-size bed, staring at the floral curtains while the world spun on without me. She didn't call. Not that night, not the next. You'd think that would be the most agonizing part, the proof of my insignificance. But it wasn't until I logged into our shared streaming account and saw her profile picture had been updated. Our beaming wedding photo replaced with only her face, a triumphant, solitary smile. This one small change revealed a truth more brutal than any argument. That's when I truly understood. She had deleted me long before I ever walked out the door, and yet she had no idea what was coming next. Because when I stopped caring, I didn't just vanish from the apartment. I began meticulously unweaving myself from every strand of the life I had woven around her. Soon she would feel that precise, devastating emptiness too. The third morning, I surfaced in that motel room, the thin curtains letting in only a sliver of the gray dawn, the distant rumble of trucks, a lullaby for the heartbroken. For a fleeting moment, I forgot I was gone. My hand instinctively reached for my phone, only to remember it was still off, a dark rectangle on the dusty nightstand. I wasn't ready to face the messages or, more likely, the crushing absence of them. But something peculiar began to unfold in the profound silence. I started to hear things that had been drowned out for years. My own thoughts, the deep ache of my exhaustion, the quiet thrum of my grief. Have you ever been so lost in someone else's world that you forgot your own heartbeat? I realized I had been emotionally starving, meticulously packaging it as devotion. That day I returned to the apartment, not to speak with her, but simply to pass through. I still had my key. I was about to uncover a secret she never wanted me to find. She was in the living room, barefoot again, engrossed in a video call. Her voice was light, playful, the charming, high-pitched timbre she reserved for strangers, a stark contrast to the clipped, sharp-tongued woman I had lived with for years. She didn't hear my quiet entry. I stood in the hallway, watching her reflection in the mirror above the console table. And then I saw it, draped casually over the back of the sofa behind her. A dark hoodie, undeniably not mine. Her laughter softened, became more intimate. She tilted her head conspiratorially. "You should have stayed over," she murmured. "He didn't even come home." I left as silently as I had entered. There was no need for further proof, no need to sift through texts or confront her with questions whose answers I already possessed. That one whisper carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken betrayals. Back at the motel, I stared at the stucco ceiling for what felt like an eternity. Anger, the kind people expected, the screaming, the urge to smash things, was absent. Instead, I felt like a slowly deflating balloon, losing air inch by painful inch until nothing was left to lift me. I replayed all the ways I had contorted myself to please her, how I had shrunk, making myself smaller, so she could have ample room to breathe. And in the end, she still sought another around whom to exhale. Why holding on to love meant letting go of everything I thought it was. Yet despite everything, I harbored no desire to wound her, no craving for vengeance. I simply wanted her to feel it, to feel what life was like when someone who once cared so profoundly simply ceased to. So I meticulously compiled a list, a quiet inventory. Every task I performed, every part of the carefully constructed machine I had become. I would dismantle it slowly, strategically. The autopilot would disengage until she realized she was no longer being carried. No confrontation. I would simply evaporate, one chore at a time, one favor at a time, one resonant silence at a time. The first item on my agenda, removing my name from our shared lease. I had no expectations for her reaction when she discovered the updated lease agreement on the kitchen counter. Not a note, no dramatic monologue, just a thin stack of papers. The only missing signature was hers. Mine was already scrawled in black, next to the box indicating removal from tenancy. She stood there holding the document as if it were hieroglyphics. Her brows slowly furrowed, the veneer of practiced confidence draining from her face like color from a cheap print. She cast a bewildered glance around the apartment, as if searching for other metaphorical limbs I might have already amputated from her life. But I was still physically present, sleeping in the same bed, brewing coffee each morning, breathing the same air. Yet everything felt perceptibly colder. She offered no words that day. She simply folded the lease, placing it back where I had left it. No eye contact, no questions, just silence. Perfect. It was precisely what I desired. This was the nascent stage of her confusion in my measured retreat. I continued to play the role of the houseplant husband, existing, but no longer blooming. I didn't inquire where she was going when she left the house, enveloped in a perfume I hadn't smelled in months. I stopped cooking. I ceased offering to pick up groceries. When she succumbed to the flu, I didn't rush in with restorative soup and medicine. I merely placed a bottle of cold remedies on the bathroom sink and went for a walk. That's when I learned true care isn't about grand gestures. It's about the small, consistent acts of humanity. That walk led me to an old, dusty bookstore, a sanctuary I hadn't visited in years. It was a place I had cherished before marriage became a demanding profession, before I became a background extra in my own life. I wandered through the labyrinthine aisles like a stranger encountering his own forgotten past. It was then that I saw her, a woman quietly weeping in the poetry section, attempting to conceal her vulnerability behind towering shelves. Her raw emotion struck me with such force I nearly fled. Instead, I extended a tissue from my coat pocket, saying nothing. She offered a fragile smile, no words of thanks, just a simple nod. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt truly seen. Not as someone's husband, not as a disappointment, but simply as a human being, someone who still mattered. I returned home that evening, uncertain if I felt lighter or simply more profoundly alone. Inside, the lights remained off. No dinner, of course, no perfunctory, "How was your day?" Just the hypnotic blue glow of her phone screen illuminating her face as she scrolled, her feet tucked beneath her on the sofa, like a teenager deliberately ignoring an unwelcome parent. I walked past her. She didn't even look up. In that moment, I knew I had officially become invisible. Being invisible gave me the most dangerous power of all, the freedom to disappear. But the paradoxical beauty of invisibility is the freedom it bestows. It allows you to observe, to plan, to subtly shift. So the following morning, I called the bank. In just 16 minutes, I began dismantling a life built on an illusion. I sat on hold for precisely 16 minutes, ample time to watch an entire cycle of our shared laundry tumble into a damp, indistinguishable blur in the washing machine. I hadn't informed her I was transferring half of our joint account into a new private one. There was no need. My name was still on my paychecks and I was breaking no laws, merely severing the oxygen supply to a system that had never acknowledged I was the one keeping it alive. The bank representative asked if I preferred paper statements or email. I chose paper. I desired something tangible, something real, something that wouldn't simply vanish behind a glowing screen, like every emotion I had ever attempted to express within that apartment. By the end of the week, my payroll had been updated. New deposit path. Quiet independence secured. I refrained from any ostentatious changes. The bills remained on autopay. The subscriptions still ran. I wasn't attempting to shatter her world. I was merely extracting myself from it, millimeter by millimeter, until she inevitably noticed the empty outline where I used to reside. I began staying out later, wandering aimlessly. I'd sit in the park, people watching until the sun dipped below the horizon. I'd dine alone, devouring articles on my phone that I used to bookmark and never read. One Tuesday afternoon, I even indulged in a long, contemplative walk through the art museum, an activity I hadn't pursued since my 20s. For a precious few moments, I remembered what it felt like to be genuinely curious again, not just perpetually exhausted. Back home, she started to notice the dishes accumulating in the sink. A small rebellion, perhaps, but one that resonated. She began to pepper the air with sarcastic asides under her breath. Guess the house cleaning fairies quit. Or, it's not cute to mope forever. I never replied. I simply continued peeling back my presents. Like wallpaper, no one had bothered to maintain. Then one evening, the dynamic subtly shifted. I returned to find her seated at the dining table with a bottle of wine. 2 glasses, one untouched. "You've been different," she said, her voice strained. I offered no response. She pushed the second glass gently towards me. "I'm trying here, Ivar." The irony almost made me laugh aloud. Trying now, after months of being treated like an unwelcome stray. Still, I sat, not for her, but for myself. I wanted to witness what she would say when she no longer commanded the conversation, when I was no longer a desperate supplicant for her approval. What happens when your partner's carefully constructed world starts to crumble and you're the one holding the hammer? She sighed, a dramatic exhalation. "Look, I know I've been distant. I get it. You're upset, but relationships go through phases. It doesn't mean you get to just check out." I held her gaze for a long time. "You made it very clear that it's not your job to make me happy." She shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it's not, but that doesn't mean I don't care." The blatant contradiction hung heavy in the air, thick, confusing, and profoundly dishonest. I leaned back in my chair. "I'm not angry anymore. I just stopped expecting anything." And you know what truly terrified her? Not my anger, but the cold, unwavering certainty in my voice, that I was truly, irrevocably done trying. She blinked, looked away, and in that fleeting moment, I saw something new in her eyes. Not guilt, not regret, but naked fear. She finally realized that emotional distance wasn't always a temporary threat. It could be devastatingly permanent. The scariest thing wasn't my anger, but my utter, unwavering indifference. 2 days crawled by after that awkward wine-soaked conversation. She never brought it up again. She didn't inquire about my feelings. She didn't ask where I went when I stayed out late. But I sensed her eyes on me, watching me more closely, peripherally, as I moved through the apartment. Like someone observing an animal they once considered harmless, but were now unsure about. I gave her nothing to latch on to. No anger, no begging, just an unyielding stillness. cold, immovable stillness. She began to overcompensate, made dinner twice, even lit a candle one evening. Not for me, of course. Just felt like it, she offered casually. I ate in silence. She later asked if I wanted to watch something together. I replied that I was tired. It was the truth. I was tired in a way that no amount of sleep could remedy. I could feel her frustration simmering beneath her carefully composed surface. She wasn't accustomed to being ignored. Her usual games, designed to elicit my attention and validation, were failing. She had thrived on my constant need to keep her happy, even when she threw me only the sparsest scraps of affection in return. But now I had extinguished the stage lights. She was left performing in the dark. She thought she was setting a trap. I was merely laying the groundwork for her grand awakening. One morning, I deliberately left my phone unlocked, face up on the counter while I showered. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist the lure. Sure enough, when I returned, it had been moved a few inches from where I'd left it. Classic Kira, curious only when she feared I might be slipping through her fingers. I observed her carefully for the remainder of the day. She appeared calmer, almost smug, as if she had found precisely what she was seeking. But what she didn't realize was that I had left that phone deliberately blank. Every genuine trace of my plans had been meticulously deleted because I had started keeping a journal. Not a digital one, but a physical ink-on-paper journal hidden at the bottom of a shoebox in the garage, behind old paint cans. In its pages, I meticulously documented everything, not for revenge, not even for clarity, but because I needed tangible proof that I hadn't imagined it all, that the coldness, the distance, the way she weaponized indifference, it wasn't just in my head. Listen closely. This is how you plant a seed of doubt that blossoms into irreversible truth. Writing it all down helped me reconstruct the path that led me here. Like the time she'd laughed when my old dog, my only companion for so many years, died in my arms. Or how she once confided to a friend, while I was sitting in the adjacent room, that being with me was safe but profoundly boring. Or the card she gave me for our last anniversary, which read, "To a great roommate," and found it utterly hilarious. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a consistent pattern, a slow, corrosive decay. And now I stood amidst the ruins, finally questioning why I had continued to pretend we still resided in a palace. How many silent hurts does it take before you realize you're not living in a palace, but a mausoleum? That weekend I left again, without telling her my destination, taking nothing but my keys and that journal. I drove 2 hours to a serene lake, found a bench overlooking the tranquil water, and read my own words back to myself. I have no idea how long I sat there. Long enough for the sun to dip below the tree line and the air to turn crisp. What I learned that day sitting by the water was more vital than anything she could ever confess. When I returned home, she was pacing, a frantic energy radiating from her. "Where were you?" she demanded, her voice strained. I merely shrugged, her eyes narrowed. "You think this is funny? Punishing me with silence?" I met her gaze calmly. "You told me it wasn't your job to make me happy, so I stopped hiring you for it." Her jaw clenched. I walked past her, entered the bedroom, and closed the door behind me. Not slammed, just firmly shut. And for the first time, she didn't follow. That night, I slept like a stone. Not out of peace, but out of a profound numbness. No dreams, no restless turning. I simply powered down, like a computer finally succumbing to overheating. When I awoke, the apartment felt excessively quiet. Not the familiar quiet we had both learned to tolerate, but a heavy, pregnant stillness, like the air before a thunderstorm. She hadn't slept in the bed. I found her curled under a blanket on the living room couch, staring blankly at the turned-off television. She didn't speak when she saw me, merely watched me with the detached gaze one might reserve for an exhibit behind glass. I proceeded with my morning routine, wordless as ever. But when I opened the fridge, something odd caught my eye. A small, hastily scribbled sticky note taped to a Tupperware container. It read, "Lunch if you're not too proud." For a split second, a flicker of something almost akin to tenderness stirred within me. Almost. But then I remembered the countless months I had prepared her meals, only for her to sigh at her phone, utterly silent. The dinners I had meticulously planned, the holidays I had desperately tried to salvage, the casual eye rolls every time I reached out for a moment of connection. So I peeled the note off, crumpled it into a tight ball, and tossed it into the trash without opening the container. I didn't do it to inflict pain. I did it because I no longer had any appetite for scraps masquerading as genuine effort. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to reject a gesture of kindness. The truth is, something in her had indeed shifted, but not for the reasons one might expect. It wasn't guilt that stirred within her. It was fear. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing the utility I had always provided. The man who silently paid the bills, cleaned up, meticulously handled everything. Her invisible emotional janitor. She began to tentatively prod, testing for cracks, asking if I wanted to see a movie, leaving the bathroom door ajar while she showered, like old times, as if a glimpse of skin could somehow undo years of emotional frostbite. But I was no longer the same man. I no longer responded to her old bait. She was playing a game she didn't realize I'd already mastered. That's when she made a fatal error. Late one evening, I caught her texting someone. The way she angled the phone away, the rushed, almost desperate locking of the screen when I entered the room. It wasn't subtle. She set the phone face down and crossed her arms, feigning nonchalance. I sat down opposite her at the kitchen table. Picture this. The air thickens, a phone is quickly hidden, and in that split second, everything you thought was solid shatters. "Are you seeing someone?" I asked, my voice flat. She scoffed as if the very idea were an affront. "No, God, why would you even?" "I heard you weeks ago on the call," I stated, my gaze unwavering. "You said he didn't come home. You said you wished someone else had stayed over." She blinked once, her composure freezing. "You weren't supposed to hear that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I had, and there it was. Confirmation. Finally, she couldn't lie fast enough. She opened her mouth to speak again, undoubtedly to fabricate a new narrative, but I held up my hand. "I don't care anymore," I said, my voice steady, unburdened. "I'm not hurt. I'm not even surprised. I just needed to hear you say it." She looked smaller then, not physically, but in presence, as if the carefully constructed image of herself within our relationship had splintered, and she stood amidst the broken fragments, realizing I wouldn't be helping her clean them up this time. "I didn't mean for it to get so far," she said, almost defensively. I felt ignored, like you weren't seeing me." I nodded slowly. "And now you know what that feels like." I rose, grabbed my jacket, and left again. No particular destination. I simply walked, block after block, in the encroaching darkness, attempting to recall the man I had been before I began pouring myself into someone who never truly wanted to be filled. The night air bit harder than usual as I walked, my hands buried deep in my coat pockets, the silence ringing louder in my ears with every step. It wasn't the peaceful silence of contentment. It was the aftermath, the kind that lingers after something has been irrevocably broken. I wasn't contemplating my destination, only the urgent need for distance from her, from the place we had once called home, from the person I had been when I still believed she loved me. I eventually found myself back at the lake, on the same bench, beneath the same crooked tree that leaned over the water, as if listening to forgotten tales. I sat there, gazing at the moon's reflection on the dark surface, and tried to remember the last time I had felt genuine pride in who I was within that marriage. The truth struck me with the force of a physical blow. It had been years. I had slowly, imperceptibly, become a version of myself I no longer recognized, constantly compromising, always giving, rarely receiving. I had deluded myself into believing that was the definition of commitment, but all it had truly accomplished was to teach her precisely how much she could take without ever needing to offer anything in return. I thought my boundless love was a strength. It was actually the most dangerous lesson I ever taught her. When I arrived home that night, she was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed waiting for me. She looked tired, Not merely physically, but hollowed out in a way I hadn't witnessed before. "I don't want us to end like this," she said quietly. I offered no reply. She tried again. "Can we talk? Really talk?" I sat down in the chair across the room. "Then talk." And she did. For the first time in months, perhaps even years, she spoke with a raw honesty I hadn't known she possessed. She admitted the affair, stating it had ended weeks ago, that it was meaningless, that she had been searching for something she didn't even comprehend. She said she missed me, missed the way I used to look at her, as if she truly mattered. She confessed she had always assumed I would be there, no matter what. That part, that single phrase, resonated with a chilling clarity. "I thought you'd always be there." That was the core of the problem. She had built her entire comfort, her sense of security, around my unwavering constancy. She had simply assumed I would keep showing up, keep loving, keep fixing, regardless of how cold or careless she became. And I couldn't entirely blame her. I had inadvertently trained her to believe it, with every second chance, every quiet act of forgiveness. I had taught her that my love possessed no boundaries, that I would rather be trampled than walk away. But I was a different man now. My heart was a landscape of frozen emotions, and her words, once capable of melting mountains, now barely stirred a ripple. "I'm not angry," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I just don't trust you anymore." And without trust, there was simply nothing left to salvage. She wiped her eyes and reached tentatively for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't return the embrace either. Her fingers curled around mine, desperate and trembling. "I can change," she whispered. I nodded slowly. "Maybe you can, but I already did." We sat there in silence for a while. No shouting, no emotional breakdowns, just a long, empty pause between two people who finally saw the wreckage clearly. I could feel her panic escalating with every second that I didn't soften. She had always known precisely which buttons to push to make me relent. But now my silence was no longer a temporary pause. It was a firm, immovable boundary. She began to enumerate all the things she would do differently. Therapy, absolute honesty, even moving out if that's what I needed. As I listened, a stark realization washed over me. Everything she was offering now was everything I had desperately begged for when I still cared. But it was too late. I slowly stood, casting my gaze around the room. Our room, perhaps for the very last time. "I'll stay on the couch tonight," I said. "You'll have the weekend to pack." Her lips parted, a soundless gasp. "Wait, that's it? After everything?" This is the precise moment when silence becomes a declaration of war and an act of liberation. "Yes," I said, "because everything is precisely what got us here." She didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply sat there, stunned, as if her meticulously constructed plan had collapsed before her eyes, and she had utterly failed to prepare a backup. I had spent years anticipating that moment, the one where the weight of her indifference would finally strike her like a train. And now that it was here, I felt no sense of victory. I felt only in profound, liberating freedom. The subsequent 2 days unfolded like a quiet farewell. She packed without drama, folding clothes into boxes with almost robotic precision. She left behind small, poignant things. Her old scarf, the mug I had bought her on our very first trip together, a pair of earrings I had once saved diligently to afford. She didn't say goodbye when she left. She simply walked out the door and didn't look back. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel left behind. I felt as though I had finally caught up with myself. I spent the following weeks rebuilding, not just the apartment, but my inner peace. I donated the old couch where we had sat in so much suffocating silence, repainted the walls a calming neutral shade, bought a sturdy coffee table that didn't wobble. The silence now didn't wound. It healed. It afforded me the precious space to breathe, to reflect, to remember the man I was before I became someone begging for meager crumbs of affection. What if the greatest act of love you can commit is to finally choose yourself? The funny thing is, I started doing things purely for myself. I signed up for a cooking class. I reconnected with an old college friend who had moved back to town. I even adopted a rescue dog, a nervous little mutt named Mumvin, who follows me everywhere like I'm the most important person in the world. And perhaps the biggest surprise of all, I'm happy. Not in some melodramatic movie montage way, but in the quiet, subtle way you feel when you sip your morning coffee without a knot of dread in your stomach. When your home truly becomes a sanctuary again. When you finally grasp that love, real love, should never feel like something you have to perpetually earn just to survive. So no, she was right. It wasn't her job to make me happy, but it was also never my job to remain where I wasn't loved. And now I finally understand that. And that, my friends, is the most profound freedom anyone can ever discover.